All right, welcome to the last day of VCF. My name is Jason Perkins, and the talk I'm giving today is kind of a where we are at present with the Apple Lisa, and also where the Lisa and its software fit into the history of office computing. So, to start out with, I'd like to make mention, unfortunately, the Lisa community lost someone that was very important to a lot of us. Ray Arkelian passed away in January of this year. So there's a lot of us that he has helped, and a lot of us that are sad that he is no longer with us, but he's in our minds. So let's think back to the early 1980s. And if you wanted to get a computer that had bitmap graphics, speed, storage, what would you get? What would you do? Well, you'd probably have to visit the ivory towers of computing, and you might end up with something like a Three Rivers Perk, a Xerox Star, a Symbolics 3600. These were all very expensive machines. The Star was $16,000 per workstation, but that was not the actual cost because you also had to buy Ethernet and a laser printer and a file server. So your cost to just get the first system going was $76,000 in 1982, and then $16K each increment after that. The Perk, that's a little bit earlier, also designed by teams at Xerox that worked on some of the post-Alto type machines. Those are $45,000. If you were lucky enough to get a Symbolics machine, the sources that I found said those were $110,000 in early 1980s money. So pretty expensive. So what was at the other end of the spectrum? Well, you were now kind of the plebeian person being stuck with some character mode device. And the Lisa fits between these two classes of system. So the Lisa was Apple's first personal computer with a graphical user interface. The team spent 5 years developing the hardware and software for this machine. A lot more time was spent on the software than the hardware. It was half the cost of a Xerox Star. In 1984, a Lisa with a 10 megabyte hard drive was only $6,000. And all the time that Apple spent developing the software and the way that the Lisa worked would set the groundwork for the next 10 years of software at Apple. Even though Apple kind of very quickly pivoted away from the Lisa on a forward-looking perspective, if you actually look at a lot of the code, there's a lot of stuff that is either directly brought over from the Lisa or lessons learned were used in later Apple software products. And that's because Apple and their team had to invent a lot of the ways that we interact with computers today. So I've got some screenshots from some documents from, this is from 1980, where Apple was figuring out what is this Lisa, how are you going to interact with it? And this is talking about how to change fonts. They hadn't changed the name of the function key from Apple to Control yet, but if you want to change fonts, Apple X for copy, or excuse me, what do they actually have? No, this is reversed. Apple X is paste, Apple C is copy, Apple U is undo, these sorts of things that we're familiar with now. They had to define what a scroll bar was. A scroll bar was a new concept, and this section here talks about how you'd push the little buttons, and that would make the elevator move up and down, and that would be what you would use to move the text. And if you click in the area between the buttons in the elevator, it'll scroll you at a page at a time. Xerox didn't do that. How to scroll. And then I particularly like this section where it describes, if you're working with text, how you can do text selection by single-clicking to move the insertion point, double-click to select the word, triple-click to select the sentence. All of these documents were written before Apple visited Xerox. But the interface that they are describing isn't what we ended up with as the final Lisa interface. Fortunately, the idea of icons hadn't been invented yet. So at this time, each window that you'd be working with was a file folder, and when you were done with it, it closed and went to the tab list on the bottom of your window. And just a note, all of the documents that I'm sharing screenshots of now are available on BitSavers. I'll have a link to that later in the presentation. So, although this particular look might not be super familiar, we do have the pull-down menus. Those were new. The scroll bars with the elevator. There was discussion that Apple had at the time, should the size of the elevator change depending on how much content there is? We're all familiar with that now. They tried it and decided against it because users found it confusing. This is another document. It's a little bit later, email from 1996, where the team that did the Lisa was talking about inventing all of these UI elements and going to be writing a book about it, which was not published due to the Microsoft lawsuit at the time, where they were suing Microsoft over stealing the UI. So they thought, oh, maybe we shouldn't divulge too much about how we worked on it. But this is a member of the Lisa team. And this, first source here I think sums it up pretty nicely, that when Apple visited Xerox and saw the star, they got a lot of inspiration. They had been doing a lot of work beforehand, but seeing what Xerox was doing really kind of clarified and honed them in on a direction. So let's talk about what the Lisa did well and what the Lisa did not so well. So the Lisa team focused very, very hard on having a consistent user interface. They wanted you to be able to learn one part of the system and then be able to do everything. A big component of that was cut, copy, paste. The Lisa had cut, copy, paste of structured data between all of the 7 applications that the machine had bundled as its office system. There were some caveats that you couldn't take a picture and paste it into the character terminal program. But they had this structured data exchange format, and that was new. And a PC at the time, you didn't have multitasking, and working on data between applications, you'd be importing something already done and bringing it into the application you were working on. You weren't selecting copy paste. Oh, I want to change it. Copy paste it back into the original, like the graphics editor, make a change and go back. You didn't lose the structure. The Quick Draw graphics engine, written by Bill Atkinson for the Lisa, is what also defined the Macintosh. Quick Draw, if you look at any Macintosh product, System 7 or before, you're looking at Quick Draw. That's what's putting all the pixels on the screen that you can see. That was developed for the Lisa. In fact, it was originally called Lisograph, but the name was subtly changed. The machine was designed for serviceability. Every module on the Lisa is on card edge connectors. Everything is card edge connectors, easy swap. You know, oh, there's a problem with one of the serial ports. Great, we'll just swap the whole your friendly service representative can visit your office and swap the whole I/O card. And like we said earlier, reduce cost. It was not a cheap machine, no doubt. But it was a lot less expensive than the first round of options, which came immediately before. But what wasn't so good? The Lisa had a semi-closed platform. There were development environments where you could write a program for the Lisa, but they were not well documented initially. By '84, Apple had released a programming workshop with a bunch of templates and easy ways to get your applications into like Office systemify them and put them in a window, and it had a built-in terminal emulator thing, so you could wrap your character mode application in a Lisa window and then copy-paste data in between them. But that was kind of too little too late. Additionally, because the machine shipped with such a complete set of software, there was not an incentive for third parties to go and write software for the machine. It already had a really good word processor. Why do I need to write a new one? That really hurt them, and that's part of the reason why the Mac only shipped with Mac Write and Mac Paint. Apple didn't want to turn away third-party developers. They realized that, like with the Apple II, the third-party developers were going to be the sustaining lifeblood of this machine. And the Lisa Office System Suite, as excellent and groundbreaking as it was, also caused developers not to develop for the system, because why would you need to? The Lisa did not have any networking. It's an expensive workstation, and I feel like if they had added a networking component where you could have a simple email, file sharing mechanism, it would have made the machine adoption better in your fancy high-rise office of the late 80s. Apple had actually developed networking for these systems. They never released it publicly. They had network cards that would actually, at the factory, they net booted every Lisa off of a NAS to load the diagnostic software, and it would run and all that, but they never released that to the public. The software side of that got recycled into AppleTalk. Every Lisa does have the same Zilog 8530 serial controller that the Mac has, but the Lisa software makes no special use of it. The Lisa is only a 5 megahertz machine. I'd often read at the machine's introduction that people complained it was slow, and I was a little bit defensive about that, because using my machine, I'm like, oh, this seems fine. QuickDraw and the rest of the operating system was originally written in Pascal. Most of the Lisa Office system is Pascal, and that kind of slows things down a bit on such a slow processor. For the Mac, Atkinson had to rewrite QuickDraw into assembly and squash it down so it would fit in 128K of RAM. And for later releases of the Lisa software, that improved QuickDraw was backported, and it makes the machine almost twice as fast. I was talking with Ian Primus, and he was showing me on a Lisa 1, copying a 0 kilobyte template file takes 9 or 10 seconds, just an empty file. They're really slow. It was really slow on introduction. Today, that card edge connector design that was so great when the machine was new makes them a colossal pain in the butt to work on, because for the machine to run, it has to be fully assembled. You can't probe the RAM or probe the CPU card. You can't get at the monitor chassis because it's all buried inside of the cabinet on card edge connectors. And And then the actual cost, the cost had come down by the release of the Lisa 210, as I said, they'd gotten it down to $7,000 or $6,000. But it was still a lot of money. And you had the additional problem of the Osborne effect, where the Macintosh is coming and it's going to be a cheaper baby Lisa, and it costs half as much. Well, I'll just buy that. So if we take all of this on balance, I think the cost was a big problem. I think after Apple had discontinued the Lisa, they started selling them on discount, and they sold really well. Apple was surprised how well they sold. They also had designs in the works to reduce the cost of the Lisa, and I feel like that would have really helped its adoption, but the program was canceled in 1985. Let's look at that cost breakdown for a moment. This is from another document from BitSafe. I found this really fascinating. Unfortunately, there are no numbers on this, but I have a feeling these pie chart pieces were done with actual numbers. And you can see at the bottom, the big part of the wedge is the memory. The Lisa had a full megabyte of memory, and that was expensive. You can see it also lists the hard disk as a big component expense. On the Lisa 1, the Apple proprietary Twiggy drives were expensive to make. I was also surprised the packaging, the box that the thing came in, cost more than the CPU board. The Lisa box has it's this really complicated thing. You take it and you fold it down, and then a tray with these injection molded pieces of foam glued to it, like folds around the Lisa, so you pull it out, and then you can pick the thing up off of the foam and set it on your desk. It's a really nice box, but I guess it was a really nice box. These spreadsheets actually, I've edited this graphic a bit. The comparison, there was a third wedge to this comparison where they had designed the system to only have one CPU card and put the first bit of memory on the CPU card, reducing the pieces, but Apple management decided not to go for that. Working on the Lisa too, it's amazing how much more production optimized the Macintosh is. Hopefully some of you have taken one of them apart. You know, it's a couple of screws hold the back cover on, there's a little steel frame, and that's just screwed to the front plastic bezel, which also holds the CRT. The Lisa has this steel subframe of a bunch of pieces all screwed together, and some of the screws, you've only got like this much clearance to get a Phillips screwdriver in on the screws to get in. It's a real pain in the butt to take apart and put together. And I'm sure it took a lot of time to screw all of the pieces together, screw all of the plastics on. So just the cabinet would have cost a lot to make because it wasn't very production optimized. And they actually called that updated Lisa that they were working on the Whopper, and it was going to have a 6810, which probably would have helped with the speed quite a bit, but not to be. So something that CHM has been working on for some time is getting the source code for the Lisa Office system released, and that happened in January of this year. Al Casso put a lot of time and effort into that. He's been working on getting this done since 2005, and it's finally been released. It's 644 Pascal files. The whole source code, as I recall, it's about 7 meg of text, which is kind of crazy to think that the whole thing is just that. That QR code will take you to the page on CHM. Oh, no, I take it back. The QR code will take you to the Lisa list for discussion forums that a number of us are on, where we're discussing the source code, and we've got a little simple bug tracker thing of, oh, what would be nice to do. I was hoping to have more to report on this, of, oh, we found this, or, oh, this was interesting, or, oh, we've changed this. So this is kind of a call to arms. If anyone listening is good with Pascal, take a look. Let us know what you find. I'm sure there's some interesting stuff in there, and we'd love to make some additions to the Lisa system. If you notice, I've been kind of light on actually showing you any photos of the system or videos or anything, and that's because I've done a lot of that already, and I didn't want to take up this whole presentation with replaying previous presentations. But I would encourage you, if you are interested in looking at the Lisa software, the first video is I reshot the demo that I gave at VCF East 2021 of the complete Lisa office system. So that's about an hour and a half of me going through every single part of the software and how they interact. I also compared the Lisa software to the Xerox Star software, and there are some similarities and there are a lot of differences, especially, I would say, in user accessibility of not needing to be a specialist to use the system. If you're looking for something a little more bite-sized, The Verge just released the first part of their documentary on the Lisa and how it fits in. They've got some nice interviews with Bill Atkinson and also some good short demos of the machine. I highly recommend watching all three of these if you're at all interested. Additionally, there is a documentary being worked on for the whole Lisa. It's currently in editing. Hopefully, sometimes this year we'll see a little progress, but very excited to see that as well. David's been putting a lot of work into that, and excited to see what comes out of that. We, of course, also have Al at Bit Savers to thank for helping to preserve our computing history. And that will take you to a link with a lot of documents around the Lisa. All the document screenshots that I've shared earlier are from things in that repository. What else is new? Recently, the people have reverse engineered and respun all of the Lisa circuit boards, which is excellent because if you can see, this little square says battery on it, and the original system shipped with 4 AA NiCads zip tied there that would keep the clock running for maybe an hour if you unplugged the system. And of course, those were leaking in the early 90s. A lot of Lisas at this point are dissolved. So it's good to have these PCBs available to get the system going again. There's a link to Alex's GitHub there. You can get the files and get boards made up yourself. Additionally, I've been talking with John at Glitchworks, and we are the engineering work has been done, and we'd like to start producing some of the 4-port RS-232 cards for when you're using Unix on the Lisa. Lets you hook a bunch of terminals up to it. Super useful. But we need to gauge interest a bit before we start the production run. So if you are interested in that, or potentially a 2 megabyte RAM board for your Lisa, please email me at info@compu85.net. I'd love to get these going, but it's the initial outlay is a little bit more than I have sitting around to just do without a little type of pre-order thing. So that's the end of my slides. And I wondered if anybody had any other questions about that system or anything kind of related to Lisa or early Macintosh. Yeah.
Custom ASICs in the system?
So the question is, are there any custom ASICs in the Lisa? So there's a mask ROM COP 412 microcontroller in the Lisa, which runs the real-time clock, the keyboard interface, and the soft power control, positioned conveniently right next to the battery pack. I guess that's not technically an ASIC, but that is a custom chip that the system requires to function, and it is, that's one of the more difficult chips to replace if it should get damaged. Because even you can get ROM-less versions of that, and people have made a PCB where you can put a ROM next to it. But finding even now the ROM-less version of that COP microcontroller is difficult. The Lisa 210 has an IWM chip for the floppy disk, integrated WAS machine, just like a Mac 128 through a Mac Plus, I think is the same. The Lisa 2.5 actually has a 6504, a separate little Apple II on the, almost Apple II on the I.O. board, running the Twiggy floppy drives. And the drives themselves are very, like you look at them, you're like, oh yeah, that sure looks a lot like a disk 2 with a lot of extra malarkey mixed in. So, any other custom ASICs? No, it's all pretty much logic stuff. 7400 series logic. So there are some PALs, but in general, those seem to be pretty reliable. So, did you have a question, Mackie?
Yeah, it was a very similar question. But so if you bought the boards, can you build a Lisa?
Yeah, if you bought the boards, can you build a Lisa? And I would think that, well, if you have one that is battery bombed, the answer is yes, because you can move pieces over. I know there's a gentleman in the UK right now that is just building one from scratch and is busy ordering in all the chips. So I would say yes, perhaps some things are more difficult to find, but yes, you can. At this point, I think you could build a Lisa from Mauser.
When it begins to fail, what are your options?
So the question is the widget drive, and I'll expand that into mass storage. When the Lisa originally shipped, or when the Lisa was originally envisioned, Apple had the idea, okay, we're going to have the small system that's just floppy based, and then as you move up, you might want the hard disk system. And so those original Twiggy 5.25-inch drives are 871K each. And that is enough space where you could have the Office system on one disk and an application and documents on a second. That would actually fit. Unfortunately, those drives are extremely slow and also turned out to be unreliable. So every Lisa shipped with a profile hard drive on top. For the Lisa 210, Apple took the parallel port that was on the back of the system that the profile hooked up and routed it back inside and hooked it up to another great product from the Apple disk division, the Widget 10 megabyte hard drive. So the question is, when your widget is sick, what do you notice? And generally, so every time that disk turns on, it does a full sector test. And what you'll find is it goes to start, it doesn't even do it. It'll start having trouble doing its initial seek, or it won't even finish. You can low-level format those drives, and there's also a bunch of adjustments on like the current and stuff on the head servo. So I found you can adjust them back into close enough to spec to get at least the head working correctly. And then if you low-level format it, as long as the head isn't crashed, they tend to come back. The asterisk on that is if the spindle motor the bearings have turned to goo, they don't, like the motor won't have enough power to spin the drive, or it sounds like a jet engine full of marbles or something. So I don't have an answer for that. There are options for, or there are products and solutions available which emulate those Apple parallel port hard drives. Offhand, I can think of three. There's the IDE file, which is a chip and board that you can order. It's that's more of a project thing, but it lets you hook up an IDE hard disk to the Lisa. That's what I use in my Lisa 2.5. If you watch any of the any of the demos, including the one from Vox, all those are running off of an IDE file. I really like that product. There's also the X Profile from Sigma Systems that's more of a commercial option. The VCF Museum's Lisa has one of those in it. And there is a new BeagleBone-based disk emulator. I might be getting the name of this wrong. I believe it's the Cameo Aphid is the name of it. And it BeagleBone-based, plugs into the parallel port, and it will emulate a hard disk. So that's another mass storage option. Yes?
I remember towards the end of the Lisa's life, they started selling the Macintosh XL, right? Now, did they change enough in that, maybe a new ROM, that it was a Macintosh, or was it a Lisa with a new badge?
So the question is, what is a Macintosh XL? And the answer is, it is a Lisa 210, well, it is a Lisa which shipped with a sticker on the box which said, Lisa is now Macintosh XL, and a different boot diskette. That's it. And a different set of manuals. So if we wanted to talk about the Lisa models which exist, there's the Lisa 1, which has the two 5 1/4 Twiggy drives. There is a Lisa 2.5, which is a Lisa 1, where they've taken the Twiggy drives out, thrown them away, changed the plastic faceplate, put a Sony drive, Sony 3.5-inch drive inside, and incremented the ROM version. Then there's the Lisa 210, which has some very minor hardware differences, mostly to just route the parallel port, instead of out the back of the system, into the inside where the hard disk is mounted on the inside of the system. Same CPU board ROM as the Lisa 2.5, different I/O board ROM, just because that has an IWM instead of the 6504-based floppy controller. To that Lisa 2, you can add the square pixel ROM kit, which changes the aspect ratio of the display and better lets it run Macintosh software, because the Lisa does not have square pixels as it originally shipped. The screen is 720 by 384 because it was more important to be able to display 80 columns of text than a full page, because they had invented scroll bars. So that square pixel ROM, I forget the resolution, but it makes it the pixels square, so then Mac OS looks correct on that screen. But then you can no longer run the Lisa software, and you can no longer run Unix if you have the square pixel ROM kit. MacWorks, any of the Macintosh software packages for the Lisa, essentially take the Macintosh ROM from a file on the diskette, load it into RAM, and then use the MMU in the Lisa to boot that ROM image up, and boop, now it's a Macintosh. So that's the question of, what is a Macintosh XL? It depends on how many upgrades it's had. Yeah, so where the Mac fit in this Mac XL, the Apple had decided that the Macintosh was the new hotness, and that's what we're going to do. There is no more Lisa. But at that time, the Mac 512, I forget if it had just been released or was about to be released. I think it had been released, but there was no hard disk option, smaller screen. And so people starting to do bigger documents, big Excel files and whatnot, ran out of resources on the little compact Macs. So the Lisa fit in nicely for this bigger workstation, and using that MMU allowed it to do this. It's not, I struggle with saying that MacWorks is a Macintosh emulator for the Lisa, because it's actually running the code, and it's using that MMU mapper to virtualize it. Now, the Lisa is slower than a Macintosh running MacWorks, because you've got a bigger screen, more bits to fly around, and it's only 5 megahertz instead of 8. But to have the bigger screen and mass storage was, the Mac didn't have it yet until many years later. So that was another reason why the Lisa started to sell really well, is that the Macintosh got popular and people wanted to do bigger and better things. And that even led to kind of the zombie status of the Lisa, where after Apple had discontinued it, Sun Remarketing in Logan, Utah, continued to sell the Lisa well into the late 80s as a cheaper alternative to buying a Macintosh. And by the late 80s, that machine was so worthless as just a literal piece of e-waste that it made sense for them to invest in, well, them and other companies invest in the design to develop CPU accelerators and newer hard drive options, where they had an MFM to Lisa parallel port adapter card. So you could have a 20 meg or a 40 meg hard drive in your Macintosh XL. And CPU accelerators, 12 and a half, 16, 18 megahertz, 68,000. And a Lisa with an accelerator running MacWorks it's weird, because you get so used to the machine being a little bit sluggish, and then you sit down at one of those, you're like, oh, this is pretty nice. And people use those into the 90s. They developed SCSI cards for them, and cards to give them the same sound capabilities as the Macintosh. So it's interesting that, yeah, to spend $600-700 on a CPU accelerator made sense, because the whole base computer was essentially free. Yes?
Did I hear you say Unix? Was that an Apple product or a third party?
So there were two flavors of Unix for the Lisa. There was Unisoft UniPlus, which was System 5. I believe, I would need to find a better source on this, but that Apple asked Unisoft to do that port for them. Unisoft did another product for Apple you might have heard of called AIX. AUX, excuse me. And so it seemed like there was a relationship there. There was also Microsoft Xenix, which was SCO's first shrink wrap product. So on the Lisa, you can run Microsoft SCO Xenix. And as I understand it, those also make use of the MMU and the RAM and whatnot. The disk drivers in those Unixes can be a little bit annoying, because they're like very like manually coded. Like the hard disk driver in Xenix looks at the ROM version to tell, oh, is this a Lisa 2.5 or a 2.10? Well, then, of course, that means it has either a 5 megabyte or a 10 megabyte hard disk, irrespective of what's actually plugged into it. And then, oh, any additional hard disk plugged in, well, those must only be 5 megabytes, right? You can format it as a 10 meg disk as 10, but then the 5.1 megabyte that you write on there, it just goes poof. So, but yes, there are two distributions of Unix for the Lisa, and there is actually even a development version of DRI Gem for the Lisa. As I understand it, Atari, like, they didn't quite have their hardware ready yet, so they did some of their early development on Lisa 2.5s, because it's another 68,000 base machine. Yes?
With regard to the source code release, is there a publicly available development environment that will allow you to build it?
So with the source code, is there a development environment that would let you build it? As I understand it, as of today, no. Well, I take it back. So there is the Lisa programming workshop where they built it originally, and the source code contains build scripts for the development environment. As far as I know, no one has has gone through and rebuilt the Office system yet from those sources. There are, if you go to that thread on the Lisa forums, there is a link to a tool someone wrote to help you parse the source code. Like on a modern machine, it formats it all nicely and does a bunch of other things. So that's helpful. A bit more of a call to arms, I guess. No, the Lisa source has not been built as is today, and that's probably, as I understand it, that's like where step one would be to modifying it, is at least get it to build as it was. So. Yes.
What's your favorite tidbit or fun fact about the Lisa?
My favorite fun fact about the Lisa. I'm going to have to think on that. Did somebody else have a question? Yes.
Piggybacking on his question about building the code and also the comment about Atari using the Lisa as the GenDev environment. What would Apple have been using as the development systems for Lisa? Because, I mean, I can't even imagine what they'd be using in the early 80s.
They used the Lisa.
So they were like, okay, so they were bootstrapping themselves. They were using dev Lisas to develop the Lisa.
Yes. Now, the initial development, I think, was done on Apple. Like, the initial bit of Pascal stuff that they wrote was done on Apple IIs. And then they used that to write the Lisa Monitor operating system. It's really kind of bare bonesy thing. And then inside of Monitor OS, the Lisa programming workshop was built, the Pascal workshop, which is very similar to USCD Pascal system. Am I getting that? UCSD Pascal. And then that environment was used to write the Lisa Office system and also to write the Macintosh. For the first couple of years of the Macintosh's life, you did all of your programming in the Lisa workshop. And then there was a tool that you would, you'd have a Macintosh formatted floppy diskette, which is similar to but not the same as the Lisa format. You'd pop that in and then you'd run a special program that would let you move this new Macintosh program you'd written onto the Macintosh floppy diskette. So my favorite Lisa tidbit is probably that the keyboard, three-wire interface, a lot like the physical jack is like on a VT100 terminal where it's a phono jack, and the keyboard ROM contains the country code that the keyboard is. So the computer can ask the keyboard, what language are you? And then the keyboard will tell that back, and then the computer can change all of its prompts to that language. So to switch languages on the Lisa, you just plug in the appropriate keyboard.
That was not helpful to people that wanted to use two languages at once.
Not helpful to people that wanted to use two languages at once, yeah. But it was there was a set of dip headers in the keyboard as well where you could change it. But Apple tried to have all the dialogues are broken out into separate text string files. The thought being, we can just replace all of these to localize the machine. And they did. Apple did get the Lisa localized into other markets, I think, and it was sold in Japan as well. I only recently found some photos of some Lisa documentation in Japanese. So it's like, I wasn't aware of that, and I wonder how many Lisas were over there. Oh, I guess one other thing to touch on that's been kind of my project for the last little bit is, well, how many leases did they make? And so what some of us in the Lisa community have been doing is collecting every single serial number of every Lisa that we could find, and then applying the German tank problem math to it, where in World War II, the question was, how many tanks have the Germans made? And the Germans being Germans, of course, serialized everything. And there's some math you can do of, oh, we've captured N serial numbers, and here's the low one, and here's the high one, and you can figure out what the population would be. And we've done that, but I think there's like something wrong with our math, because that comes out to like 12 or 15,000 machines, which seems low, because I then went through, the way the way the Lisa serial numbers work is the first part is the year and then the day that the machine was built, and then it's a sequence number of this was the nth machine built that day. And so I just went through and added up the highest serial numbers we had for each day, and that came out to like 24,000 or something like that. So it's like, well, this other math, that's not the total, but this other math must be wrong, because this number is like double what we already had. So Apple has often said they made 80,000, 90,000 machines. That, as I've learned more, that number seems maybe more in the ballpark. So, any other questions? Yeah.
That number seems low, even in my mind. So, has Apple actually ever stated that for that number of units placed, because obviously the Mac grew out of it and everything that Apple became subsequently, did the Lisa in and of itself make any money for them?
So, I think that was actually it. That it was only, it was under 100,000 machines total. And so the question is, did Apple make any money on the Lisa? And I would say it depends on how you look at it. If you look at the raw cost of, oh, we spent X dollars and time developing the Lisa, and then we sold it for 2 years at this many, and yeah, we lost a whole bunch of money. But all of the work done on the Lisa was not, it's not like when they stopped shipping it, they just like forgot all of that or threw all of that away. A lot of that got rolled into other products. So I don't know how you would exactly capitalize that, but I don't know if Apple, like on the raw, we made this many dollars selling the Lisa. If they made money, I don't think they made a lot of money. But it did definitely enrich Apple as a company to have this technical knowledge and skill on how to build a UI.
That's a fair assessment because, everyone knows, at least I remember first from Stephen Levy's Insanely Great, that the first Mac struggled and that the Apple II was, carrying a lot of the financial burden for the company still, even though they were trying to move in the direction that, everyone in the industry would ultimately take with the UI and everything else.
Yeah, the Apple II definitely, that was the sales engine that carried Apple through until the late 80s when the Macintosh really had kind of come into its own. It was not the Lisa, it was not the Macintosh. Those were not, I think eventually the Mac did start to make money, but it was not like the thing funding Apple. And even in 1989, there were still so many new Lisas that hadn't been sold that Apple had them on consignment at Sun Remarketing, and it was cheaper for Apple to take these things and write them off as destroying old stock. And so they took, was it 2,200 or 2,700? 22? Yeah, 2,200 of them to a landfill in Logan, Utah, in the boxes, ran them over with a bulldozer and buried them. And the tax write-off for that was more than like what they would have gotten donating them or something like that. So, yeah.
I just want to add to that, 'cause that's a great point. Yeah, there was about like 3,000 machines
wow.
or something that they tossed, but in the upcoming Lisa documentary that you plugged by David Grealish, there is an interview with the person who was at Sun Remarketing at the time, and they took complete systems. No, we need the keyboard, we need the mouse, but you're going to destroy them. No, we need everything. And I actually did some research and found the only journalist that got wind of this, and I was able to dig up the photographic negatives from that day, and there was about 40 gut-wrenching photos in beautiful high resolution that I have in my possession that will be in that documentary. And it's just like, you see like the one or two photos that have been shared around online, and it's like, this paints it in a horrific light. But yeah, it's sad that they all met their end that way.
Yeah, I got a chance to peep some of those photographs, and it's not, unfortunately, there's not an Atari cartridge thing of, oh, in this landfill, there's all these Lisas still wrapped in plastic, down in here, we can dig them up. No, they were pretty well squashed, and in fact, there's the most common photo you see, it's like, you're looking up and over, and there's like a keyboard and a Lisa kind of sitting there, and you're like, oh, Well, in the high resolutions, you can see the picture tube neck's been busted off. So it's, yeah, they squashed them pretty good. Yeah, they paid more for the extra press. Any other questions?
Why wouldn't Apple give away MacWorks? Because it only costs them a floppy to give this virtualizer away to all their Lisa users, and then they get a lot bigger population of developers for the Macintosh, which they're trying to sell. And also, at the point where they're trying to get rid of excess inventory, it's easier to do that if you have the Lisa able to run Macintosh software. Now, that latter part they probably did by bundling MacWorks to be the Mac XL, to be the Macintosh XL.
Do you know, did you have to pay for MacWorks?
I don't know. Maybe they.
Apparently you did. I honestly didn't know one way or the other. Because if you bought a Mac, you got the operating system in that for free. But yeah, I honestly don't know how much it would cost. And especially some of the early versions of MacWorks are really buggy. So if you read the Lisa, there was a Lisa mailing or a newsletter thing, and some early users of that talked about how with the hard drive, like it felt like like an engineering project almost initially, where, yeah, it'll format on the hard drive and it'll install and run. Oh, that's great. And then you use the system for 5 months and you've got it all full of your documents, and then suddenly the hard drive gets slightly corrupted. And there's no way to do any kind of disk check or anything. The Apple's official thing was, oh, we'll just format it and start over. So, yeah, I would have to look up how much they charge for MacWorks. I don't know offhand, but the later MacWorks, especially the ones by Sun and Corey, from what I've seen, are a lot better. Anyone else? All right. Well, like I said earlier, I know this presentation was kind of light on technical content, but that's because I've put it in those other previous presentations. So I'd really encourage you to go look at those. They're a lot more in depth, and I think our discussion time here is a better use of this time. So I guess if nobody else has any other questions, we'll call it.
I have one.
Yes.
Is the Vox coming documentary different than the other documentary that's coming from someone else?
Yeah, those are two different documentaries. I know. So I think in both cases, there's been a lot of. The thing that I'm most looking forward to is, like, at this point, we know pretty much all the technical stuff about the Lisa. The ROMs have all been dumped, even some of the more difficult ones. We've had the software binaries for forever. Now we've got the source code, okay. But both these documentaries are now delving into the people and how the decisions were made and how we arrived at where we ended up. And I'm so very much looking forward to that because I think it's a very interesting story, and to me that's another reason why the LISA is so interesting, because it's not just this system that poof appeared in a vacuum. It was the product of its time, including the political climate at the companies where it was developed and ideas came from. So they are different documentaries. I think there's probably some overlap between them, but they are different things. Anyone else?
Earlier you mentioned that Apple had a special internal only use networking setup for net booting the leases at the factory. Has that been reverse engineered at all? Is anything known about that, or is that lost to history?
So we know a bit. A few of the cards have gotten out. We have the engineering documentation on it, and it was Ethernet-like. Ran at 1 megabit, and they had essentially a thicknet backbone cable that would go to these little drop boxes that had 4 jacks on them, and then each jack had a coupling transformer, and then you'd plug like a 4-wire DIN cable between this drop box and the LISA. The idea being it's not like thin net where you can unplug it in the middle and it breaks the whole rest of the chain. Each drop is isolated. And so we've got that. We've got the ROMs from them. We don't have the server side. Yeah, so that's about, they don't do anything today, unfortunately. It would be really neat. I was talking with John Chapman earlier, and it's like, yeah, it would be really nice if at least had networking. As he was looking through the Uniplus sources, he did find some remains of some networking stuff, even some TCP stuff, but there's no, as it is today, if you're running the LISA Office system, the only networking you've got is as a dumb terminal.
Any idea what the server would have been hardware-wise, or would it just be another Lisa, or who knows?
I honestly don't know. I do know it served the data at the block level. I don't know if it was an Apple II or Lisa or what. I don't have the details on that. I guess speaking hardware-wise, there was another hard drive that the Lisa supported back in the day, and apparently it's what there were a lot of them at Apple that the developers used. It was called the Priam Data Tower, and it was actually an 8-inch, 83 megabyte hard drive in a separate tower, and they had a special interface card. But that gave you, that would have given you enough space to have all these sources, because as it sits today, you can't, I don't think there's enough space for all of the sources and just the development system on a 10 meg drive, let alone to also have the actual Office system on there as well. So that would have been pretty nice to have. Anyone else? All right. Thank you.